My name is Nora Brandt, and I was 41 years old the night a message lit up my phone at 11:47 and changed the shape of my whole family. It came through a homework app of all things, a little green chat bubble meant for kids to ask their teachers about spelling words. It said, "Aunt Nora, are you awake? I'm hungry and nobody is home and I'm a little scared." It was from my niece, June. She was 8 years old, and she was supposed to be the safest, most cared-for child in 3 counties. Because for almost 2 years, my parents had been telling everyone, telling me, that taking her in was the great act of their lives. I read it twice. Then I was already pulling jeans on over my pajamas and looking for my keys. She lived 2 hours north of me, in Millbrook, in the same brick house my parents had owned for 30 years. I reconcile financial statements for a living. I'm a forensic accountant, the person companies hire when a number won't sit still and they need someone calm enough to find out why. People who've worked with me will tell you I don't raise my voice and I don't rush. I find the missing money by being patient long after everyone else has gotten loud and given up. So I want you to understand. I was not a woman who panicked easily, but I drove those 2 hours with my hands locked at 10 and 2 and my jaw aching. And somewhere past the second exit, I let myself ask the question I'd been swallowing for almost a year. How does a fed, housed, loved child end up typing, "I'm hungry and nobody is home" into a homework app at 1:45? Here's the thing none of them knew that night. The thing that would matter more than all their performances put together. I don't just count money. I read statements. Bank statements, financial statements, sworn statements, and the gap between what a statement claims and what the record actually shows. That gap always means something. By the time this was over, every statement my parents had ever made about that little girl would be sitting in front of a judge, side by side, in their own handwriting. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Welcome back to Burned Bridges Club, where ordinary people meet impossible family choices, and where quiet patience outlasts loud cruelty every single time. If a story about standing up for the one person who can't stand up for themselves is the reason you're here, do me a favor and leave a comment and make sure you're subscribed, because the way this one turns is going to stay with you. Let me take you back to that drive. The rain started near the county line, the way it always seems to in the worst part of any night. I told myself I was overreacting. June was a sensitive, imaginative kid. She'd lost her mother at 6, and her father was deployed overseas, so of course a thunderstorm and an empty hallway could feel like the end of the world to her. That's what I told myself. I have rarely been so wrong and so right inside the same hour. The first thing I noticed pulling up to my parents' house was the porch light. It was off. In 30 years, I had never once seen that porch dark, because my mother, Lorraine, believed a dark porch made a house look like nobody cared. And Lorraine cared what the street thought more than she'd ever cared about anything inside her own walls. A dark porch was the first line in a ledger I didn't yet know I was keeping. I knocked. No answer. I tried the door and it was unlocked, and that was the second line. Inside, the house was cold. Not winter cold, but the specific, deliberate chill of a thermostat turned down by people who decided the bill mattered more than the body in the room. June was sitting on the second from bottom stair in a thin nightgown that ended above her ankles, socks but no slippers, a school-issued tablet glowing in her lap. When she saw me, she didn't run to me, and she didn't cry. She just exhaled, this small, careful breath, like a person setting down something heavy they'd been told not to drop. "They went to Hal's friend's poker night," she said. "My father's name is Hal. Grandma said they'd be back late and I should go to sleep and not bother anybody." I asked her when she'd last eaten. She thought about it. The thinking was the answer. I went into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, and the light inside it was so dim it might as well have been a candle. There was a tub of margarine, a jar of pickles, 3 eggs, and a half-gallon of milk 2 days past its date. I opened the pantry, and the pantry had a padlock on it. A child's pantry, padlocked in a kitchen with a brand new stainless refrigerator humming over almost nothing. In a house with, I would notice this in a minute, a renovation half finished in the next room, new cabinets still wrapped in plastic. I made June scrambled eggs from the 3 eggs in the door. And while they were in the pan, she reached into the front pocket of her backpack and took out a sandwich bag of saltines, broken into pieces, and set it gently on the counter beside the stove. In case there's not enough, she said, and didn't look at me. I have stood in a lot of rooms where the truth was about to come out. I have watched grown men sweat through their shirts when they realized I'd found the second set of books. None of it ever hit me the way that little bag of crackers hit me. A child who rations food has learned a lesson no 8-year-old should ever have to learn, that the next meal is not a promise, it's a maybe. I made her a second egg she hadn't asked for. She ate both like someone might take the plate. Then headlights swept the kitchen wall, a car door slammed, and I heard my mother laughing on the front walk. Lorraine came in first, still mid-laugh, a department store bag swinging off her wrist, and a fresh set of acrylic nails catching the light. She saw me, and the laugh died the way a song dies when somebody yanks the needle off the record. Nora. Not a greeting. An accusation with my own name in it. "What are you doing in my house at midnight?" My father came in behind her, bigger and slower, smelling of cigarettes and other people's houses. He looked at the plate in front of June, then at me, and his jaw set in the exact way I remembered from my entire childhood. The look that meant the discussion was already over in his mind, and I just didn't know it yet. I kept my voice level. That's the only weapon I've ever trusted. I asked why the pantry had a padlock on it, why there were 3 eggs and a jar of pickles in the refrigerator, and why an 8-year-old was home alone in a cold house at midnight, scared enough to message an adult 2 hours away. My mother's whole face rearranged itself into a thing I'd watched her do my whole life. The soft, wounded look of a woman being wronged. She is not a baby, Nora. She knows how to call someone if there's a fire. We are allowed to have a life. I asked about the food again. And my mother said the sentence I will hear in my head for the rest of my life. She said it lightly, almost cheerfully, like it closed the whole matter. She's fed. She's housed. What more does a child need? I looked at the new refrigerator. I looked at the cabinets wrapped in plastic. I looked at June, who had gone very, very still over her empty plate, the way prey goes still. And my father stepped, not toward me, just into the space between me and the staircase, planting his body there like a fence post. "You moved away," he said. "You don't get to come in here and judge how we live." I understood, standing in that cold kitchen, that they had rehearsed this. Not the exact words, the posture of it. The certainty that I was the intruder and they were the injured party. I've audited people who stole for a decade while bringing potato salad to the company picnic, and I promise you, I know the difference between a guilty face and an offended one. My parents were not guilty. They were interrupted. I picked up my coat. June's eyes went wide and panicked, and I knelt down so we were level. I told her I was not leaving her. Not really. I was leaving to do the only thing I have ever been any good at, and that I would call her tomorrow, and she should keep the tablet charged and close. She nodded. My mother watched us with her arms folded across her cardigan like I was a thief casing the silver. On my way out, I saw it, propped against the empty fruit bowl on the counter, where fruit should have been. A glossy printout, a riverboat cruise, 7 nights, a couple in white silhouetted against a sunset, a balcony stateroom circled in pen. The paper was crisp, new. Next to it, a receipt and the instruction manual for a brand new range, still in its plastic sleeve. I didn't touch any of it. I just looked the way you look at a financial statement when one line refuses to agree with all the others. Here was a household that could not keep bread and fruit and a winter coat that fit a growing child. And here was a 7-night cruise, with a balcony, and a kitchen renovation, and fresh acrylic nails. My entire career lives in that exact distance. The space between what people say they can afford and what they actually spend. That distance is never random. It's always paying for something. My mother caught me looking. "We work hard," she snapped, sharp now, the wounded look gone. "We're entitled to nice things." Nobody had said they weren't. I said goodnight to June, told her I'd call, and walked out into the rain. I sat in my car in their driveway for a full minute before I turned the key, and I did the thing I always do when a number won't leave me alone. I wrote it down. On the back of a parking receipt, I wrote, "Padlocked pantry, empty fridge, cold house, child alone at midnight, cruise, new range, new cabinets, acrylics." I didn't know yet where the money was coming from, but I knew it was coming from somewhere, and I knew that 8-year-olds do not generate income. And I knew exactly who in that house was certain I would never, ever check. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because the people who love control will always tell the story as if you came at them swinging. Everything in my body wanted to carry June out to the car right then, that night, in the rain. A lot of you would have. I don't blame you, but I knew what would happen if I did. My parents were her legal guardians. I was an aunt who lived 2 hours away with no standing and about a 40-minute head start. Taking her would have been called a kidnapping in any courtroom in this state, and it would have handed my mother the single thing she did not yet have: a reason to point at me and say, "See? She's the unstable one. She's the danger." The same broken system that was failing June was the only system that could save her. And you do not beat a system by breaking it. You beat it by understanding it better than the people who are hiding inside it. So I drove the 2 hours home, and somewhere around the halfway mark, the accountant in me took over from the sister and the aunt. I stopped feeling and I started listing. What did I actually know? A child's mother had died. Her father was deployed and far away, and the child was being neglected, not beaten, neglected, which is quieter and harder to prove and just as much a wound. And there was money in that house that did not belong there. I didn't have a number yet, but I had a smell, and after 20 years, I trust the smell. I got home at almost 2 in the morning, and I did not go to sleep. I made coffee I didn't need, and I opened my laptop, and I started the only kind of digging I'm good at. The kind that doesn't leave fingerprints, because it only ever touches the truth. Here's what I assembled over the next several days, in the cracks between client files and too little sleep. When June's mother, my sister-in-law Cora, died of cancer 2 years ago, June became eligible for Social Security survivor benefits. When a working parent dies, the child gets a monthly check until adulthood. It is not charity. It is money Cora paid into the system her whole working life, set aside for exactly this nightmare. But a child can't receive money directly, so someone has to be named the representative payee, the adult legally bound to spend every dollar of it on the child's food, clothing, shelter, and medical care, and to bank whatever's left over in the child's name. I confirmed what I already suspected. My mother had filed to become June's representative payee within 5 weeks of the funeral. And there was more than the survivor benefits. My brother Eli, June's father, was deployed overseas with the Army. Before he shipped out, he had set up a monthly family allotment, money pulled straight from his pay and sent home to my parents' account, so his daughter would never want for anything while he was gone. 2 income streams, both legally meant for one little girl, both flowing into a house with a padlock on the pantry. But here is the detail that turned my stomach and sharpened me at the same time, and I need you to hold on to it, because it becomes the whole spine of this story. A representative payee who is the child's parent doesn't have to file an annual accounting, but a grandparent does. Every single year, my mother was legally required to submit a written statement to the government reporting exactly how she had spent that child's money, down to the categories: food, housing, clothing, medical, savings. A statement. In her own words, signed under penalty, sitting in a federal file. I sat at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, and I wondered what a year of those statements would say if anyone ever lined them up against the bank records. And I wondered, with a coldness I didn't entirely recognize in myself, whether my mother had any idea that the document she filed to make herself look responsible was about to become the rope. The question was no longer whether money was missing. The question was how much and how I would prove it without ever once raising my voice. I tried the kind way first. I want that on the record, because it matters. I called my mother on a Sunday afternoon, and I kept my tone as warm as I could make it. I said I'd love to take June for the summer. Give them a break, get her caught up on her checkups, let her swim at my place. I offered to send a few $100s a month for groceries, no strings, just to help. I made it about lightening their load, not about catching anyone. My mother's voice dropped 10 degrees in 3 seconds. "We don't need your money, Nora." I said it wasn't about need, it was about June. And that's when my Aunt Dot got on the line, because of course she was there. My father's sister, Dot, the woman who has narrated my mother's version of every family event for 40 years, the chorus to Lorraine's every performance. "Honey," Dot said in that syrup voice, "that child is a little drama queen. She messaged you because there was a storm and she wanted attention. You're reading way too much into a thunderstorm." I asked Dot gently when she'd last looked inside that refrigerator. There was a pause. Then my mother again, flat and final. "If you keep pushing this, we'll move. New town, new school, and you won't get our new number." That wasn't a slip. That was a strategy, said out loud. And she heard herself say it, and she did not take it back. I told her I'd think about everything she'd said. I hung up, and I sat very, very still. Because here is what they had just handed me. They thought the threat would frighten me into silence. What it actually told me was that they knew they were exposed. People who are genuinely certain they've done nothing wrong do not threaten to disappear with the evidence. Innocent people invite you in and show you the receipts. Guilty people threaten to vanish. In my line of work, we have a quiet phrase for the moment a subject stops cooperating and starts threatening. We call it consciousness of guilt. I had just heard my own mother demonstrate it over a Sunday phone call, so the next morning I did the thing I do. I made a single polite, formal request in writing, the way I'd request records from any subject of any audit. As June's aunt and her closest blood relative besides her grandparents, I asked, in plain and courteous language, to review the annual payee accounting. The report any representative payee is required to keep. I copied no lawyers. I named no agencies. I made no threat. I just asked the paper to talk. My father answered, and his answer told me more than 100 documents could have. He did not say, of course. He did not say, "Here it is." He said it was none of my business, that the government had never had a problem with how they did things, and that if I contacted anyone official, I would never see June again. I read that email 4 times. Then I printed it and put it in a folder, because a refusal that behaves exactly like a confession is itself a piece of evidence. A clean payee hands you the file and says good riddance. A clean payee does not threaten to hide the child. I didn't have proof yet, but I had a rule they were almost certainly breaking, a refusal dripping with guilt, and a very clear idea of who could pry the rest of it loose once a court was involved. I built the rest of it the way I build every case, brick by lawful brick. And I never once did the thing the movies love. No hidden camera, no secret recording, no dramatic confrontation in a parking lot. I don't need theater. I need documents. Because documents don't get nervous on the witness stand, and they don't change their story under pressure. I requested June's school records, as the family member I am, and they told their own quiet, terrible tale. 14 absences in a single semester. A standing place on the free and reduced lunch list, which I was glad existed, and sick to realize was very likely her only reliable meal of the day. A note in the file from the school counselor about a child who'd been caught wrapping leftover cafeteria food in a napkin to take home, and a flag from the nurse. June was overdue for a wellness check by more than a year, had never seen a dentist while in my parents' care, and had an inhaler prescription nobody had refilled. None of it, on its own, was a bruise. All of it, together, was a pattern. And patterns are the only thing I've ever been good at. I started a timeline, a real one, dates down the left margin, the way I'd build it for a jury. Money in, money out. A child's needs unmet on one line. A grown couple's wants met in full on the line right beneath it. And then there were the calls with June, which I'd set up carefully through that school tablet, in the brief windows when she had it. I kept them light. The last thing that child needed was to feel like she was being interviewed, like she was evidence. So we talked about her drawings and a chapter book she'd hidden under her mattress so it wouldn't get tidied away, and her teacher's class hamster. And then, in the offhand way that children deliver the worst news of your life, the details would just fall out. The pantry was locked because Grandma says I snack too much. She didn't have a winter coat that fit. She was wearing last year's with the sleeves at her elbows. On the nights they went out, she sat in the dark because Grandma says the lights cost money when nobody's home. And one night, while we were on the tablet and she was scrolling to find a picture she'd drawn, for me, she went very quiet. "Aunt Nora," she said, "there's a video in here of my daddy, from a long time ago. He says he'll see me soon." I asked her to play me a few seconds, and there was my brother's voice, recorded who knows how long ago, telling his daughter to be good for Grandma and Grandpa, that he loved her to the moon, that he'd be home before she knew it. "Have you talked to him?" I asked. "On a video call or the phone?" "Grandma says Daddy's too busy and far away," June said. "She says calling him just makes me sad, so we don't." I sat there with my coffee going cold. Because my brother Eli was deployed, yes, but deployed soldiers call home. They write. They video chat from a tent at 3 in the morning, their time, because it's the only thing keeping them sane. The family line was that Eli was in a rough place, hard to reach. You know how he is. I had half believed it. The way you half believe the worst about people when you're tired and far away and your own parents keep repeating it. But here was his recorded voice, alive in his daughter's tablet, saying, "I'll see you soon," the words of a man who fully intends to come back to a child he loves. I made a note that night, the careful kind I never lose, to preserve that tablet and everything on it before anyone thought to wipe it. Then I told June I loved her, and I hung up, and I did something I should have done a year earlier. I found a way to reach my brother directly. It took me 4 days and a few favors through the family readiness channels the Army keeps for exactly this. When Eli's face finally came up on my screen, gaunt, sunburned, older than the last time I'd seen him, the first words out of his mouth were, "Nora, is June okay? Please, tell me June is okay." And the entire story I'd been told for 2 years came apart in my hands. Eli had not been in a rough place and unreachable. He had been calling. He had been writing. He had been sending money home every single month from his pay, an allotment he'd set up specifically so that his daughter would have everything she needed while he was gone. And for months, his calls to the house had stopped connecting. His letters got no reply. When he managed to reach my mother, she told him June was thriving, that she was busy with school and friends, that calling too often was unsettling her routine, and he should let the child adjust. She told him I had stepped in and was helping a lot. That between her and me, June was surrounded by love. She had told me, of course, the mirror image, that Eli had fallen apart, that he was barely in touch, that I should stay out of it for the child's sake. They had stood between a father and his sister and a little girl, fed each of us a different, perfectly tailored lie, and quietly collected the money from every direction. The survivor benefits, the allotment, and I would learn within the week more more besides. "Why didn't you just come home?" I asked Eli, not as an accusation, as a brother question. "I tried to get emergency leave twice," he said, and his voice cracked on it. They told me back home everything was fine. Mom sent me photos. June at the lake. June with a birthday cake. She looked happy, Nora. She looked so happy. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. Were the photos even real? The photos were real. That was the worst part. They were staged. There was a difference, and I would spend the next month proving it. The week after I reconnected with Eli, I drove back up to Millbrook because I needed to see the performance with my own eyes before I tried to take it apart. There was a fundraiser pancake breakfast at my parents' church, and that word, fundraiser, is going to matter in about 30 seconds, so hold it. I parked across the lot and I watched. My mother held court like a queen at a coronation. She had June in a dress I'd never seen, hair brushed into ribbons, and she presented her to the room like a trophy of her own goodness. The other women circled. Such a blessing. You two are absolute saints. Taking her in. Not everyone would. My mother pressed a hand to the little gold cross at her throat and said she only did what any grandmother would do for an orphaned child. My father stood beside her looking gruffly, modestly noble. My Aunt Dot refilled the syrup pitchers and beamed. And taped to the wall, by the donation jar. The donation jar was a poster. Help Lorraine and Hal give little June a loving home. There was a photo of June and a paragraph in my mother's handwriting about the heartbreaking cost of raising a grieving orphan on a fixed income and a QR code that linked, I would discover that afternoon, to an online fundraiser that had collected just under $19,000 from strangers and neighbors who believed every word of it. So let me lay out, plainly, what was flowing into that house. Survivor benefits the child was legally owed, a deployed father's monthly allotment, and nearly $20,000 of community charity raised on the back of a little girl's dead mother, and the lie that there wasn't enough. 3 rivers of money, all of it draped over a child in a too small dress, performed for a room full of decent people eating pancakes. I'd brought a grocery bag and a winter coat in June's size. When I walked up, the temperature of the whole circle dropped a few degrees. "Nora," my mother said, bright as glass. "We weren't expecting you." A cousin I hadn't seen in years touched my elbow and murmured, like she was doing me a kindness, "You're not really trying to take her, are you? After everything they've sacrificed?" There it was. The story they'd planted in the soil all around them and watered for 2 years. The devoted, sacrificing grandparents, the absent father, and the bitter, childless aunt who showed up out of nowhere wanting to smash a happy home out of spite. I didn't argue. You cannot out-talk a story that's been growing for 2 years. I just knelt down and helped June into the coat, and I watched her face when the sleeves came all the way down to her wrists for the first time in a year. She looked at me like I'd done magic, a coat that fit. That's what counted as a miracle in her life. I stood up, said a polite goodbye to the circle, and decided I was finished being polite. The next week, I took everything I had to a family law attorney named Frances Ortega. She was about my mother's age with French Hornsey, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and absolutely no patience for cruelty wearing the costume of duty. She read my timeline without a word, slid it back across the desk, and said, "You build a tidy case, don't you?" I told her it was the only thing I knew how to do. She walked me through it carefully, the way good lawyers do, never promising what a judge would decide. We would file a petition for emergency custody, arguing that June's welfare was at risk. We would formally request, through the court, the full guardianship accounting and the payee statements that nobody had ever voluntarily produced. And this was the part that mattered most to me. The financial picture I'd reconstructed would not, by itself, pull June out of that house. That's not how it works. Frances was clear about that. But paired with the school records, the medical gaps, a welfare check, and her father stepping forward, it could absolutely move a court to act. And separately, it would trip a review of how those benefits had been handled. Misuse of a child's survivor benefits is its own serious matter, Frances said. The agency can demand full repayment. It can refer it further. That's not our courtroom. But it's a door that opens the second the numbers are on the table. She looked at me over the glasses. And the fundraiser. If they solicited donations under false representations, that's a separate problem with its own teeth. You understand I can't promise you a criminal outcome. I told her I didn't want my parents in prison. I wanted June at a table with food on it and a father who was allowed to call her. Then let's put the documents in front of a judge, Frances said, and let the documents talk. That was the whole strategy. Not one raised voice. Just the truth, filed in triplicate, on time. They felt it coming the way animals feel a change in the weather. The day after Frances's office sent the first formal letter, the calls with June got harder. She'd answer on the tablet, then go quiet, then whisper that Grandma was in the doorway. One evening she got maybe 10 seconds out before the screen went dark, and when I called back, it didn't connect at all. The next afternoon, she managed a single typed message, in the slow, careful way of a kid who isn't sure she's allowed. They said the tablet is only for school now. My mother had started working on June directly. I'd learn the script later, because it's the same script she's run on everyone her whole life. Aunt Nora is trying to break up our family. Aunt Nora doesn't really want you. She just wants to win. If you go with her, you'll never see Grandma and Grandpa again. And won't that be so sad? 8 years old, and they were teaching her to be afraid of the one adult fighting for her. Lorraine also called Frances's office herself, sweet as pie, to say there'd been a terrible misunderstanding, that of course, she'd be happy to clear everything up. And, oh, by the way, they were thinking of moving closer to Hal's cousin in another state, for June's stability. And wouldn't it be a shame to disrupt the poor child with all this litigation? Frances translated it for me in one sentence. She just told us on a recorded line to a lawyer that she's a flight risk. I almost laughed. People who love control cannot help narrating their own plans out loud. It's the same instinct that makes an embezzler keep the spreadsheet. I told Frances we needed to move before the moving truck did. She was already drafting. We filed everything inside 72 hours, and the petition did what a petition does when there's real, documented concern attached to it. It triggered a welfare check from the county. I wasn't allowed to be present, which was its own particular torture, sitting in Frances's waiting room while a stranger walked through that house. But the caseworker's report, when it came, read like someone had copied it off my own notes without ever having met me. The near-empty refrigerator, now photographed and dated in a government file. The padlocked pantry. A child in clothes that didn't fit in a house with a half-finished luxury kitchen. And the detail that stopped even the caseworker. The things she wrote up in her own words. Hidden around the child's room, in her backpack, in a coat pocket tucked under the mattress, were small stashes of food, crackers, a granola bar, half a sandwich, wrapped and saved. A child who hoards food has learned, somewhere deep and early, that food is not guaranteed. The report didn't use my mother's word. It didn't say fed and housed. It said the child showed signs of chronic neglect and food insecurity in a home with apparent discretionary income. Apparent discretionary income. 4 cold words, and the whole case lived inside them. I read the report twice, and then I called Eli, who had finally secured emergency leave and was already in the air, and I told him it was real now. It was in the record. And he should come straight to Millbrook, because his daughter was about to need her father in a courtroom. My mother does not lose quietly. The counterattack came fast, and it was uglier than I'd braced for. She hired her own lawyer and rewrote the entire story in his language. I was the bitter, childless aunt who'd swooped in after years of absence to steal a grandchild out of jealousy. I'd never offered to help, they swore in their filings, never sent a dime, never visited, until suddenly, I wanted custody. Eli was the unstable soldier who'd abandoned his daughter and was being manipulated by his scheming sister. Every single one of these claims was the precise opposite of the truth, and that's exactly what made them dangerous. A clean inversion is so much harder to fight than a simple lie. It makes the honest person sputter. And, this is important, they put a lot of it in sworn statements. Affidavits. Signed declarations to the court, under oath, that they had spent every penny of June's money on June. that there had never been any want in that house, that the child was flourishing, that I was lying. Hold that. They were now on the record, in writing, under oath, swearing the opposite of what their own bank statement said. They were stacking statements like firewood and handing me the match. The pressure in those weeks was constant, and it was built to make me doubt myself. Cousins stopped returning my calls. An old family friend sent me a message I won't repeat here. There were nights it nearly worked, but there was one crack in their wall, and her name was Raina. Raina was a 19-year-old who lived 3 doors down, a community college student my parents had paid in cash now and then to sit with June on the nights they went out. She called me, not Francis, me, late one evening, and she didn't really apologize. She talked in circles about how she'd needed the money for tuition, how she'd told herself it wasn't her place, how she'd noticed things and looked away. Then her voice dropped. She used to ask me if I'd brought any food, Raina said. June. Every time. Before she even said hi. Did you bring anything to eat? And one time I found these little piles of crackers hidden behind her books, and I asked her about it, and she made me promise not to tell, because Grandma would be mad. A long pause. I've been sick about it for months. I told myself it was a phase. It wasn't a phase, was it? I didn't comfort her. I'm not proud of how little I felt for her in that moment. She was a teenager who'd taken cash and looked away, but she had still seen what she'd seen. I just noted, the way I note everything, that the chorus was losing the tune, and that a witness who can't sleep sometimes becomes an honest one. I told her, gently, that if she meant it, she could say it where it mattered. She said she would. I gave Frances her name that night, and then we hit the wall I'd been warned about, and it still knocked the wind out of me. At the first hearing, a brief one, just to set the schedule, the judge declined to remove June from the home before the full hearing. Courts favor the status quo. They favor it especially with grandparents, and especially when the people raising a child can point to 2 years of stability and have a lawyer there to point at it for them. June would stay where she was, with my mother whispering in her ear until the matter was fully heard. Weeks away. Frances had told me this could happen. Knowing it might happen did absolutely nothing to soften it when it did. I drove the 2 hours home that night, and I sat in my dark driveway with my forehead on the steering wheel, and I let myself feel it for exactly as long as I could afford to. Then I lifted my head. Because here is something 20 years of chasing money people swear isn't missing has taught me. Slower is not the same as losing. The numbers don't expire. A documented truth only gets stronger sitting in a file. A lie has to be maintained every single day, or it rots. So I made myself useful instead of frantic. I got a court order for brief, supervised calls with June so they couldn't cut the line again. I checked in with the caseworker to keep the file warm. And on one of those monitored calls, in the calmest voice I own, I told June that this was taking longer than I wanted, but that I was not going anywhere, that I'd be sitting right in that courtroom, and that the truth was on its way, even when it felt slow. Promise? She said. I don't make promises I can't keep, I told her, but I'm making this one. Then I went home and I built the thing that would keep it. Eli landed and drove straight to my house, and when he came through my door in his uniform with a duffel over his shoulder, I almost didn't know him, and then I absolutely did. Thinner, steadier, a year of hard duty in his face. He'd brought a folder of his own, because the army teaches you to keep your paper in order, and grief had made him careful besides. Inside were his leave and earning statements, the military pay records, showing month after month the family allotment routed to my parents' account. Money he had believed, with his whole heart, was feeding and clothing his daughter, stacked right on top of the survivor benefits they were already misusing. I want to be careful here, because Eli's money is not actually the heart of this case. The survivor benefits are, because those are the documented, legally owed, federally tracked funds But his allotment corroborated everything. It showed a father trying from the other side of the world while the people in that house took from every hand that reached toward that child and gave her almost none of it back. He sat at my kitchen table and read my timeline and then the caseworker's report, and his hands shook. "I left her with them," he said. "I thought I was doing right by her. I thought serving was how I'd give her a future." I told him the truth, because he needed it more than he needed comfort. Serving was the right thing, trusting them was the mistake. And it's a mistake any decent person makes about their own parents, because the alternative is unthinkable, right up until it's sitting in a government file in front of you. "Will the judge let me have her?" he asked. I told him I didn't know. Then I told him what I did know, that he was going to stand up in that courtroom and tell the truth, in order, without performing any of it, and that the two of us together were a wall they were not going to be able to talk their way through. The week before the full hearing, the bank records I'd only been able to estimate finally came through, pried loose by the court the moment Francis's petition was filed. And they confirmed my reconstruction down to the dollar, which is the moment a forensic case stops being a theory and becomes a thing you can simply read aloud. So I did what I do best, for the most important file of my life. I built the exhibit, not theater, architecture. A single timeline a person with no accounting background could follow in 90 seconds. But the spine of it, the thing that made the whole exhibit land, was the statements. 3 kinds of them, in 3 columns. In the first column, my mother's annual payee accounting statements, filed with the government, in her own signature. Year 1. She had reported that 100% of June's survivor benefits went to the child's food, housing, clothing, and medical care, with a modest amount saved. Year 2. The same. Sworn. Signed. On file. In the second column, the bank statements. The casino withdrawals, clustered like clockwork in the first week of every month, right after the benefit deposits cleared. The riverboat cruise, booked 4 days after a deposit. The kitchen renovation, the salon, the new range. Where June's groceries and coat and dentist should have been, there was a silence you could hear. And in the third column, the one I knew would do the quietest, deepest damage, my mother's own public statements, her social media, because Lorraine could not stop performing her own life. There she was, posting a photo of the new kitchen with the caption that she was, "Finally treating myself, life is short." There she was at the casino buffet. There was the cruise, 3 days into the very trip the bank statement had paid for. My mother in a sun hat with a cocktail, captioned, "We earned this." Every post dated, every date matching a withdrawal. And woven through all of it, the fundraiser poster and its page, where she'd written to strangers that she could barely afford to feed her orphaned grandchild. 3 sets of statements, one claiming the money all went to the child, one showing exactly where it actually went, one bragging about the spending in real time to several hundred Facebook friends, and then the smallest, heaviest piece of all, the school tablet, which I'd flagged for preservation that very first week. With the activity logs formally in hand, I could finally read the record it had been quietly keeping. The after-hours logins, the tablet waking at 10, at 11, at 11:47. On the exact nights my parents' bank statements showed them at the casino, a child, alone in a dark house, opening a homework app because it was the only window she had to an adult who'd answer. The device they dismissed as a school toy had been keeping the truth the entire time. I organized all of it into a binder, tabbed and indexed, and I made 4 copies. The night before the hearing, I laid it on my kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. There's a particular feeling that comes when a case is finally whole, when every number has somewhere to be, and nothing is left dangling. It isn't triumph. It's quieter than that. It's the feeling of a thing being true and being able, at last, to prove it. That same night, my supervised call with June came through, and her voice was smaller than usual. She knew the hearing was the next day. Somehow, she knew the size of it. "Grandma says if the judge listens to you, I'll lose my room and my school and everybody I know," she said. "She says you'll take me away from everyone." I closed my eyes. My mother was working right up to the buzzer, teaching a child to be afraid of her own rescue. Nobody is going to make you disappear from anyone who really loves you, I told her, keeping my voice level the way I had through this whole long thing, because June had had more than enough adults lose their composure at her. Tomorrow, some grown-ups are going to talk for a while in a quiet room. Your only job is to be 8 years old. My job is to make sure the truth gets said out loud. What if they don't believe you? There it was. The same fear I'd carried 2 hours up the highway in the rain, handed back to me in a child's voice. I thought about the binder by my door, every page of it. June, I said. I brought the receipts. She didn't get the joke, but she heard the steadiness underneath it, and the steadiness was the point. Go to sleep, sweetheart, I told her. Tomorrow's the day the grown-ups finally listen. I hung up. I did not sleep. I was ready anyway. The Millbrook County Family Courthouse is a plain brick building with bad lighting and worse coffee, and on the morning of the hearing, it held everyone who mattered in this story. My parents sat with their lawyer, a smooth man in a gray suit. Aunt Dot sat behind them. A few relatives filled the gallery, there to support the saints. Raina sat alone near the back, pale, having driven herself. And Eli sat beside me in his dress uniform, his back very straight, his daughter's drawing folded in his breast pocket. Frances laid our binder on the table like it weighed nothing at all. My mother had dressed for the part, a soft pastel cardigan, the little gold cross, the costume of a woman who has only ever loved. Her lawyer opened exactly the way we'd expected. He spoke of 2 devoted seniors on a fixed income who'd taken in an orphaned grandchild when no one else would lift a finger, of a son who'd left his child behind for a deployment, and a sister who, out of bitterness and an empty house of her own, now wanted to tear apart the only stable home the little girl had ever known. He said the word stability the way a magician repeats a magic word, hoping repetition would do the work that proof should. He gestured at the cardigan, at my father's grave nod. For a few minutes, under that fluorescent light, I watched the judge listen to it with a careful, neutral face. And I felt the old childhood fear climb up my throat. What if the story wins? It's such a good story. Then Frances stood and said simply that the truth was much plainer than all of that, and asked the court's permission to walk through the there. Ness scored. I had told Frances I didn't need to make a speech. The entire strategy of my life is that the documents make the speech. So we put the exhibit up on the screen, one clean page at a time, and I answered the judge's questions in the flat, specific voice I use with clients. No adjectives, just dates and dollars. This is the survivor benefit, deposited the 3rd of every month. Her own posts, dated, the new kitchen, the buffet, the sun hat, and the cocktail, and we earned this, set directly beside the fundraiser page where she'd written to strangers that she could barely afford to feed an orphan. I read the 2 captions one after the other, in the same flat voice. And I watched the gallery understand them at the same moment. Then, the school records. The 14 absences, the free lunch, the counselor's note about the napkin of food. Then, the medical gaps. Then, the caseworker's photographs. The humming, near-empty refrigerator with its expired milk, and the inventory of food a frightened child had hidden around her own bedroom. Then, the tablet logs, the 10s and the 11s, and the 1147. Lined up against the casino withdrawals on the very same nights. I never raised my voice. I didn't have to. There is a particular quiet that falls over a room when a story everyone half believed collides with a fact that cannot be argued with. The judge looked at the cruise booking, looked at the photograph of the refrigerator, looked for a long moment at my mother in her soft cardigan, and my mother, who had been dabbing at her eyes for the gallery, stopped dabbing. Frances let the numbers breathe. And then she did the one thing we'd planned, the only flourish in an otherwise bloodless case. She asked me, for the record, what my mother had said the night I found June alone about what a child needs. I repeated it word for word in the same flat voice. She told me, Your Honor. She's fed, she's housed. What more does a child need? Frances let it hang in the air. Then she gestured at the screen, at the cruise, at the casino, at the photograph of an 8-year-old's hidden crackers, at the fundraiser begging strangers for grocery money. And she said quietly to the whole room, "We now know exactly what Mrs. Brandt believes a child needs. Her own statements tell us. The trouble is that she filed 3 different ones, one for the government, one for the bank, and one for her friends, and they don't agree. The record shows what she actually spent the child's money on instead. The line landed the way a true thing lands. I watched it travel across the gallery. The cousin who'd touched my elbow at the church looked at the screen, then down at her own hands. The old family friend shifted in his seat. The story they'd all been fed for 2 years. The saints and the jealous aunt. Dissolved in the time it takes to read a date off a bank statement. She's fed. She's housed. What more does a child need? My mother had built her entire defense on that sentence, and it had just become the most damning thing in the room. Across the aisle, I watched the exact second Lorraine understood that her own words had turned on her. That was when she broke. And I want to describe it honestly, because for 2 years these people had owned the story of who was calm and who was unhinged, and the courtroom watched that story flip in real time. My mother started with tears, the practiced kind, pressing the little gold cross, telling the judge she'd given up her retirement for that child. When the judge's face didn't soften, the tears curdled into blame. "Eli dumped her on us," she said, her voice climbing. "He ran off to play soldier and left us with a kid we never asked for, and now everyone wants to treat us like criminals." Then the self-pity. "Do you have any idea what we sacrificed? Any idea at all?" And finally, when none of it caught, the anger that had been sitting under everything the whole time. She turned and pointed at me across the room. "You ungrateful little thing. You always thought you were better than us. You always did." Her lawyer put a hand on her arm. She shook it off. And my father, who had said almost nothing the entire morning, leaned forward and delivered the line he had been delivering my whole life, the one he'd used in that cold kitchen weeks before, certain it still had its old power. "You moved away," Hal said. "You don't get a vote." The judge, who had been patient, set down her pen. "Mr. Brandt." She said it with the flat authority of a woman who has heard every version of this story in this exact room. "The vote is mine, and I've read the statements." I did not say a word. I didn't need to. For the first time in 41 years, my father's certainty had run headfirst into something harder than itself, and the whole room heard it crack. Then it was Eli's turn, and my brother stood up in his dress uniform and did the bravest thing I have ever watched a person do. He didn't perform any of it. He just told the truth, in order. He told the court about Cora and the year of cancer and trying to be a father and a nurse and a soldier all at once. He told them why he'd deployed and how he'd set up the allotment before he left so his daughter would never go without. He showed his pay records, month after month of money sent home. He told them how his calls stopped connecting, how his letters went unanswered, how he was assured June was thriving and that calling too often would only unsettle her, how he'd been sent stage photographs of a happy child at a lake. "I trusted my parents with my little girl," he said, and this time his voice did not break. It just dropped, very quiet. "And they used her. They used me. They used my pay and her mother's death, and the kindness of strangers at a church, and they padlocked the food." His lawyer entered the pay statements, the leave records, all of it lining up beside my timeline like a second witness saying the same thing in a different voice. And then Francis called the witness the other side never saw coming. Raina walked to the stand with her hands shaking and was sworn in, and she told the court she had to say something because she couldn't sleep anymore. She told them about the cash she'd been paid to sit with June on casino nights. She told them how the child asked her every single time before anything else whether she'd brought food. She told them about the crackers hidden behind the books and the promise June had made her swear not to tell. I told myself it wasn't my business, Raina said, looking at her own hands. But she's 8. It was everybody's business. It did not make Raina a hero. She'd taken the cash and looked away for the better part of a year, and a few honest minutes on a witness stand doesn't erase that. But it broke the last load-bearing wall in my mother's house of stories, and it broke it with the truth. The judge took a recess, and the longest 20 minutes of my life passed in a beige hallway with Eli pacing and me sitting very still, the way I'd learned to sit still my whole life. When the judge came back, she spoke plainly, and I'll give it to you the way she gave it to us. The evidence of neglect, she said, and of the misuse of the child's benefits was, in her words, substantial and thoroughly documented. She was removing June from her grandparents' guardianship that day. She was awarding custody to Eli, June's father, with a structured transition plan. Supervised at first, stepping up quickly as he settled stateside and proved the stability he was, frankly, already proving by standing there in that room. And she named me as the standing family support and temporary co-guardian to anchor the handoff, so that June would never again be one closed door away from the people who loved her. As for the money, the judge was careful. The way the law is careful. The question of the misused survivor benefits would be referred to the appropriate federal agency for review, which could require my parents to repay every dollar they'd taken and could open further proceedings. The fundraiser solicitations, she noted, raised questions that were not for her courtroom, but would not simply evaporate either. She did not promise prison. I had never wanted prison. I watched my mother's face as she understood that she would have to give back, in actual dollars, what she had spent 2 years telling herself she deserved, and that the comfortable story of the sacrificing grandmother was now a government file with her signature all over it. It wasn't ruin. They'd keep their house. They'd keep each other and their half-finished kitchen and the relatives who still wanted the old story. They would not keep that child, or that child's money, or the version of themselves they'd sold to a church basement full of pancakes. And across the room, a little girl who had typed, "I'm hungry and nobody is home" into a homework app on a stormy night was told, in the gentlest voice that hard courtroom owned, that she was going home with her dad. The first night, the 3 of us ate dinner at my kitchen table in Cedar Falls. A real one. Roast chicken and far too many vegetables and a grocery store cake with no occasion on it except that we could. June ate carefully at first, like the plate might be taken away, and then slowly, like she was beginning to believe it might not be. Her coat, the one that fit, hung by my door where she could see it. It took months. It took a good counselor and a lot of ordinary, unremarkable dinners. But the food hiding stopped. These days, Eli has an apartment 2 blocks from mine and a job he doesn't have to leave the country for. And June walks to my place after school most afternoons and raids a refrigerator I keep deliberately, gloriously overfull. She doesn't ration crackers anymore. She doesn't whisper into a tablet in the dark. The last time she was scared of a thunderstorm, she texted me a photo of the lightning and 3 exclamation points, the way a kid is supposed to be scared of a storm. Raina wrote me a letter once. 2 pages. Mostly about herself. I read it, and I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away either. She told the truth when it counted, late, and for tangled reasons, after a long time of looking away. I've decided that's a real thing, even when it isn't a clean thing. Aunt Dot still tells the old version to anyone who'll sit for it, which is fewer people than it used to be. We don't see my parents. The agency review went forward. Last I heard, they'd been ordered to repay what they'd taken, on a schedule that will follow them a good long while. I take no pleasure in that. Not much, anyway. They weren't monsters in a fairy tale. They were two people who decided, quietly and over time, that a child's needs were smaller than their own comfort, and who told themselves a warm, repeatable lie until a cold ledger and their own three contradicting statements made the lie impossible to hold. If there's a single thing I'd carve over the door of that courthouse, I learned it from an 8-year-old with a school tablet and a sandwich bag of crackers. You can perform goodness for a church basement. You can write whatever you like in a fundraiser, post whatever you like online, swear whatever you like to a judge. But you cannot make 3 different statements about the same money and have them all be true. Somewhere, the record is keeping the real one. And someone patient enough will eventually lay them all side by side. Blood made us relatives. It was showing up in the rain and building the truth one line at a time and refusing to look away that made us a family. That's the story. One frightened message at 11:47, 2 hours of rain, and a stack of statements that spoke louder than any shouting match ever could. If this reminded you that quiet courage and a clean record can protect a child when good intentions can't, take it as your sign to check on the kid nobody else is checking on. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.